All right, so we are going to be looking at manuscripts today. And we'll be looking at manuscripts off and on throughout the medieval period, because this was one of the primary art forms during the medieval period. Beyond architecture that we'll be looking at, beyond objects, two-dimensional art is going to be, quite a bit of it is going to be in manuscripts. There's a lot of manuscripts done. So we'll look at what they are, what they're used for, how they were done, what the styles were, etc. Just keep in mind we're barely going to be scratching the surface. There's going to be a lot more that you could dive into later. But first we need to talk about the Celts. There's two groups of Celts that we're going to be talking about. And as the medieval period starts, remember the map I showed you last time, right? The Celtic people were primarily in Europe, right? So in the area of modern-day France, modern-day parts of modern-day Germany, that's where the Celts were. And then they were pushed up into modern-day Ireland, Britain and Ireland. So there were the people who were there, and we call them the insular Celts, so the Celts of the island, right? But then there's also the Hiberno-Saxon Celts, and these were Celts who intermarried with Anglo-Saxons, right? Yeah, so who were the Anglo-Saxons? The Anglo-Saxons were peoples who ordinarily came from Norse, right? Descended from the Norse people, who we'll look at next class. And then this forms this kind of group of people called the Celts. Mm-hmm.
What's called the Celts and that's called the Boston Celtics?
Mispronunciation.
White kilts.
White kilts?
Like bagpipes.
Yeah, that's the Celts.
Where does kilts come from?
Kilts, that's a different word. It's an entirely different word. Okay? No. Shh. Okay, so this was an area of a lot of great production, not only of art, but of culture. Again, because it's insular, because it's on an island, it produced a fairly stable environment. Not a lot of people are going to be attacking the Celts, are going to be attacking Ireland. There's going to be some, but it's going to be a pretty stable environment as compared to mainland Europe, where there's going to be skirmishes and fights, and this king is going to overtake. It's going to get really complicated really fast. But the Celts are going to be pretty self-sufficient and kind of on their own. Did you have a question, Tony? Okay. So I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it was wonderful. Okay, so this is a monastery. So this is a very early Celtic monastery, and this is what it looks like. Right? That's just the monastery. So we have a small chapel. We have small places for dining. The monks were living in individual huts. There's obviously farmland. There's places where people can raise things. And the tower is there for protection, right? So it's to oversee the sea.
Who would have attacked the monastery?
Well, look, a lighthouse.
Monasteries are very wealthy.
They are?
The monasteries are pretty wealthy. During the time, this was because there's a lot of food, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of cattle. Cattle are money, right? And on top of that, there's a lot of people who are donating things, right? There's chalices, there's altar linens, there's all this kind of stuff. So monasteries are kind of this little microcosm of culture that start to exist, right? Monasteries are going to play a hugely important role in the life of medieval Europe. Again, we'll look at a whole class of what medieval monasteries are like later. What? They tried to be, yeah.
That's where Rapunzel got her tower, right?
It is a little bit wonky, yeah.
How would you fight that? They have swords and stuff?
So we'll talk about that when we talk about monasteries. But generally, there was a knight, there was a lord who was nearby, and there was some sort of a symbiotic relationship between the local monastery and the lord. You don't want to tick off the monks. That's your eternal salvation. The monks want to play nice with the knight. He's your protection, and so the knight is going to help protect.
Just one knight? Just one guy.
Well, he has an army, right? Oh. So there's going to be a castle nearby with a secular system, right? And it's very much a symbiotic relationship. Yeah.
Why deal with the whole army? Why rob that person?
Exactly. That's why they would start to get these relationships going. All right, so Irish monasteries are going to become centers of learning, knowledge production, and art for the next 2 centuries. The most important products of these monasteries were manuscripts. We looked at a similar map of this, but these are all of the early Irish monasteries. There were many more later, but these were the early Irish monasteries by about the year 400 or 500.
Wait, where did St. Patrick go?
St. Patrick was all over the place. He helped found a lot of these.
American?
You got Mayo.
Mm-hmm.
Mayo Clinic.
Evan, easy.
Wait, Legend of Kells, right? That's Kells there.
Mm-hmm.
Movie. Wait, what? There's this movie. It's kind of old. We used to watch it all the time. It's called The Legend of Kells. It's super cool. Kells? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Kells, like the monastery. Like in the big box.
Kells. So I'll pass this around. You guys can start to look at it. We're going to be looking at this book, this manuscript in detail. Some of the monasteries are not. So when we think of a monastery, we think of what? A chapel. We think of cloisters. We think of a place where, there's all of this. Shh, please. We think of, cloisters. We think of a chapel. We think of life in common, right? All of these cells, all of these rooms together. But again, very early ones, they would do what's called these beehive huts, because they look like beehive. And so this is before the rule of St. Benedict. This is before monasteries really kind of come into their own and become what we think of today as monasteries. Very early monasteries were just groups of individual ascetic people who were kind of on their own, and there was kind of a loose community. So these were the very early ones on the Irish coast. And they still exist today because they were very well built. Later on, we start to see the development of more concrete structures. And I'm not talking about the material concrete. I'm talking about, structures where people gather in common, right? There's going to be kind of like dorm rooms, chapels, etc. St. Kevin was one of the early, more important abbots. And this is in Glendalough in Ireland. There's a ruins of monastery founded by Kevin in the 6th century.
Is that like a cemetery?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be looking at a few different eras of manuscripts. We're going to be looking at early Irish ones, specifically the Book of Kells. That's the book that I'm passing around to you. I think there's another book about the Book of Kells behind you on the bookshelf. That's one of the more famous ones. That is probably the famous ones. There's also the Lindisfarne Gospels. That is in modern day England. But again, those were run by the Celts as well. And then we're going to be looking at a couple different manuscripts that were done in mainland Europe. Because as time moves on, they're going to take inspiration from what the monks in Ireland are doing, and they're going to start to create manuscripts in modern day Europe. Of some of these, yes. A lot of them have been lost, but we still have some of these.
Did they speak English or no?
It was early English, early Germanic. You wouldn't be able to understand it today. All right, so first we're going to look at how a manuscript is made. You're going to want to take notes just on the basic concepts of these so that you can be able to tell me later how they're made.
In the Middle Ages, parchment was used to make the pages of books. Parchment was made from the skins of animals. The transition from a fresh skin to a surface suitable for writing was a slow and laborious process. The parchment maker selected skins of sheep, goats, or calves. Skins were soaked in lime water for 3 to 10 days to loosen the animal's hair. The parchment maker then scraped away the hair and any remaining flesh. After this, the skin was soaked in fresh water to remove the lime and then stretched tightly on a frame. A special rounded knife was used to scrape the hide to the desired thickness. The process of scraping continued over the course of several days. During this time, the parchment maker continually tightened the tension on the stretching frame while the skin dried. The result was parchment, a smooth and durable material that could last over 1,000 years. Before parchment could be written on, it had to be specially prepared. First, the parchment was rubbed with pumice powder to roughen the surface, and then dusted with a sticky powder. These steps made the surface receptive to inks and colors. The whole finished skin was then cut down to the size of the pages needed for a particular book. A big manuscript was assembled from sheets almost as large as a single skin. For smaller books, the skin was cut into 2 or more pieces. The parchment sheets were folded and nested to make gatherings, usually of 16 or 20 pages. The vibrant illuminations in a medieval manuscript often overshadow the words on the page, yet the writing of the script was as important as the painting of the images. The tools of a scribe, the person who copied the text onto the page, were simple. Pens, called quills, were made from the feathers of a bird, which were soaked in water, dried, and hardened with heated sand. The scribe carved the quill to a rough point, cut a slit to draw ink down, then trimmed the point to the proper width. The shape of the quill point varied with the style of the lettering being copied. Scribes made ink from a variety of materials. Gallnuts, growths found on oak trees, were often used to create a dark black ink. Black ink was also made by dissolving a common carbon substance. The resulting ink was called lamp black. Before the scribe began writing, he ruled the parchment using a straight edge. Medieval scribes and their patrons prized a regular and elegant script. If a scribe made an error, he would scratch it out with a penknife. Because the page was made from parchment, which was very resilient, it could stand many erasures of this type. An illuminator decorated the pages of a manuscript using paint and precious metals. He began only after a scribe had finished copying the text. The illuminator first sketched his design, then added details, such as the features of a figure or the interlacing of a decorated initial. Thin sheets of precious metals, like gold leaf, were always applied first. The illuminator put down a base coat consisting of either a plaster-like substance called gesso or a gum, as shown here. Once the gum base dried, the moisture in the illuminator's breath was enough to make the small piece of gold leaf stick to the page. Then the illuminator brushed away the excess and polished the gold leaf. After applying the gold leaf, the illuminator painted his design. Each color was made from a vegetable dye or a mineral substance ground up and dissolved in liquid. The illuminator applied the paler shades first, then the darker tones. Once the illuminator applied black outlines and delicate white highlights to the figures and vines, the illumination was finished. After the scribes and illuminators had finished writing and decorating the parchment pages, the manuscript was bound. Groups of folded sheets of parchment, called gatherings, were sewn together with strong linen thread onto flexible supports, such as these narrow leather thongs. Next, the binder attached end bands, which secured the top and bottom ends of the pages in the spine of the book.
This is still
The binder then
the same
laced the leather
process
thongs along the spine
books are made today,
through
just
channels
mechanical.
and tunnels, which had been carved into wood boards. These boards were the covers
least
of the
good books.
manuscript. The thongs could be held in place by wood pegs or iron nails. The volume was then covered, usually with leather. Without pressure from the covers to keep the leaves flat, parchment expanded and contracted with changes in temperature and humidity. Pressure was applied by the addition of clasps or straps, which held the book closed. The binding of a manuscript could be decorated with any one of a variety of materials. A manuscript might be covered with leather, stamped or tooled with gold, or covered with silks or velvets. The most elaborate bindings received sculpted decoration made from precious metals. The materials of the binding depended on the wealth of the patron, the type of manuscript, and its intended use.
So that's insane. How do we know they did it like that?
We can kind of reverse engineer like how they did it. And there's, again, still that same tradition. You know, monks were doing this through the 1700s, 1800s, and so on. So this was the way to produce books, basically from, you know, from the 300s, 400s, all the way up until the invention of the printing press, and then beyond. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to be looking at a few different of these books, of these manuscripts. This is one of the early ones that we have. We do have some older ones, or just fragments of them. But as you can imagine, I mean, these are in still pretty good shape, right? Because they're parchment, because they're made of animal skin, not paper, they're much more durable, right? Like the video said, they can last more than 1,000 years, and we have them. So yeah.
Sorry, books like today that we want to last for a long time, do we do this still, or do we have different?
It's more of, so paper will last as long as it's kept dry, and as long as it's not handled too much, not handled with too many oils. And so we still have paper books that are, from the time of Shakespeare, etc. But paper is just going to disintegrate faster. It's more of an organic material. It's going to break down faster. So they could produce things out of paper, but that was kind of a newish technology. It was happening in China at the time. China was doing paper making way before anyone in the West was doing it. Obviously, Egypt was producing papyrus. But this was a way to make sure that these books are going to last, right? And the pages are thicker because it's animal skin. All right, so we're going to look at one individual. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's kind of off topic, but so like the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
where's like the original copy of it? Okay, or they don't have it in.
So they do. They have original copies of the first translations, and those date from about the same time period, about the 400s.
But does it stay in a specific place?
No, there's several of them ranging from about that time. I think they're all in. No, that's fine. I think they're all in monasteries or museums at this point. So we're going to look at one individual manuscript at a time, and I'm going to be kind of jumping around the page a little bit at a time, kind of defining some things. So first we're going to look at what's called the symbol page. The symbol page was the first page of a book of the Gospels, and sometimes in a manuscript there's going to be all the Gospels. Sometimes it's just one book of the Gospels. It just depends on how the illuminator was going to be doing it. But this is called the symbol page, and this is the symbol page in the Book of Durrow for the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew his symbol is the symbol of a man, right? We have the ox, we have the lion, right? We have the eagle. But I'm showing you the symbol of the man for each of these. That way you can kind of get an idea, kind of compare and contrast. Book of Durrow, 650 to 700 is one of the earliest examples of this Hiberno-Saxon illuminated manuscripts. So we have a page with the symbol of the evangelist. This is not the evangelist himself. This is just a symbol of a man. And then we have what's called the carpet page. The carpet page is simply a decorated page. What's that?
What? You said it's not you said it's an evangelist, but what gives it away that it's an evangelist?
So this is because this is the very beginning of the book of Matthew.
Oh.
And Matthew's symbol is a man.
Okay.
So if we're looking at John's gospel in the Book of Durrow, there would be an eagle here instead.
Okay.
And then next, facing it on the opposite side, we have what's called the carpet page. And this is generally just a decorative page. So on this page we have usually the symbol page, and then you open it up, carpet page here, and then we have the text starting over here. So this is just a decorative page, and this is coming from early traditions of decoration from the Hiberno-Saxons. There's going to be a lot of influence, and again, we have to kind of do some of this stuff out of order. There's going to be a lot of influence from the Norse peoples that we're going to be seeing next class, but just kind of keep this pattern in mind, and when you look at the Book of Kells as well, you're going to see a lot of the same patterns and a lot of the same decoration from the Norse peoples as we're going to see from the Hiberno-Saxons. And then in the Book of Durrow, then we get to what's called the Incipit page, or the beginning page. This is where the gospel actually begins. So this is just a page with the initial letter of the gospel. The initial letter is usually very big, and then we have the text of the gospel. Sometimes the initial letter of the gospels is so big that it takes up the whole page, and then you flip, and then you actually start the gospel. It just depends on what the illuminator. That's an N. Okay. So this is written in Latin, but it's written in a text where it's a little more difficult for us to understand, but it's still readable. All right, so let's go back again real quick. So this is very different from Roman traditions. The body is very flat, right? It's a very flat decoration. We're going to see more three-dimensionality in some other manuscripts. The whole body is basically, it's a symbol in a sense, right? They're not trying to be representative of a man. And in fact, his cloak looks absolutely flat, like a checkerboard pattern. It's really only using 4 colors, yellow, red, green, and black. The artist is not really interested here in a lot of colors. Is it because he didn't have access to colors or what? Maybe this is a stylistic, we don't know. But he's just trying to get across this idea. It's also interesting because this is, like I mentioned, a lot of influence from the Norse traditions of decoration and pattern. And then we're also going to see some influence from actual enamel work, right? So when the artist is doing this stuff, he's kind of getting inspiration from both the Norse people, but also from actual jewels and enamel. And he's going to kind of try to represent that here.
What's that picture?
This is just a carpet page, so it's just a pattern. There's nothing representational here. Okay. All right, next we're going to look at the Lindisfarne Gospels. This is in the Lindisfarne Monastery of Northumbria. Now we're getting into the 700s. Also one of the earliest well-preserved illuminated manuscripts. And here we're also looking at the symbol page from the Book of Matthew. A little bit different, right? Yeah?
What is the checkerboard representing?
It's not, it's just pattern. Here we have something a little bit different, right? A lot more three-dimensionality, even though the perspective is not very good. So we have here Matthew writing the gospel. There's a lot of debate about what the guy is behind the curtain. We don't know, right? We don't know what's going on here. But that is Matthew, and then we have his symbol, which is the angel or the man above him. So above Matthew is the symbol of Matthew, and then it's showing him writing the Gospels.
Above Matthew is the symbol of Matthew.
Right. So each of the evangelists has a symbol, right? It's a little bit
Where's the symbol? Oh, he was the eagle. I thought it was a man. Yeah, I thought it was a man. Not an
man, angel. It just depends. Sometimes it's an angel, sometimes it's a man. Okay.
Does he have like what is that?
Some sort of sandals.
Oh.
It's Jesus.
I know.
This is very much classical in style. There's a lot of classical influence, right, from Rome, from Greece and from Rome, right? The seated man, the seated philosopher. Philosophers were always seen as seated and teaching. And so they're bringing in some of that tradition, some of that ancient tradition from early Roman, early Greek art into bear with this manuscript as well. In the carpet page and the Incipit page from the Lindisfarne Gospels, we see more complex decoration, so more complex decoration in the carpet pages. And then we have the Incipit page a lot bigger, right? A lot bigger first letter, and then they're going to be starting.
What letter is that?
Same thing, it's the N.
Oh,
Yep.
It's called the carpet page. Is it supposed to look like a carpet? They want it to look like carpet, or just call it that?
It was just filling up the page with decoration. So later art historians are going to call it the carpet page. Maybe they did too. I'm not 100% certain. So this is called the cross carpet page from the Lindisfarne Gospels, just because it kind of looks like a carpet page. The carpet page does not exist in any later, or in a lot of the later manuscripts. They're just going to kind of forego this. This was purely kind of a Celtic tradition.
So, you know how the picture with like Saint Matthew was drawn before the apostles out in the gospel, right?
Uh-huh.
Were those as well?
Yep, same thing. So same thing with this, and then on the left side we have just this decoration, and then this actually begins the Gospels. And then you move to the next page, and then it's smaller text.
Like things you put on like the floor of a cathedral or church.
Yeah, yeah. And they're kind of taking inspiration from a lot of different places. Again, from Norse, from enamels, maybe even from tile work.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's just purely a decoration page. It is.
Oh my gosh.
The Book of Kells gets a lot more complex.
That is such a cool thing.
This is why this is one of the more popular and well-known manuscripts, is because it's crazy complex.
Is that a word? You just started it?
Yeah, so this is the beginning of one of the Gospels as well. And you can barely tell what it is, right? So we have the first few letters, and then we have the rest of the word down here. And then you flip the page. I don't know what the word is.
Is that multiple letters?
It's multiple
Is
letters.
that a P? Is there
I think it is. I'm not 100% certain.
L?
It's a Q.
Yeah.
No, it's backwards.
Really, really complex. This is kind of the high point of the complexity of Celtic manuscripts, is the Book of Kells. There's a lot of complexity here, right? This is another Incipit page.
What letter is that?
Tons of hidden imagery in here as well.
What letter is that?
I'm not sure. So you can look through that book that's being passed around, and they give you a lot more information. They give you a lot more information about what the actual letters are, and it gives you a lot more information as well. One thing that's unique about the Book of Kells as well is before the Gospels actually start, we have this kind of introductory page that gives the symbols of all four of the evangelists. We don't have that in some of the other ones. But again, there's no rules. You can do whatever you'd like.
Bottom left.
Bottom left. So we have, yep. So we have the eagle, we have the man, we have the ox, and we have the lion.
Where's the line?
Up top.
Maybe here?
That's a line?
I don't know. Again, artistic representation.
That's so neat.
That's wings.
All of them have wings.
Again, like I mentioned, there's a lot of hidden imagery in here. Why are the artists going to be putting all of these hidden images in here? It's sort of like a meditation. It's kind of like a spiritual Where's Waldo, right? You're going to be looking through this, and you're going to be able to kind of meditate and find stuff, and this is part of the reading, right? So this was, these were some of the traditions of the Book of Kells. So let's compare contrast just a couple here. So Incipit page from the Lindisfarne compared to Kells, right? This is the same beginning of the same Gospels. You can tell how complex it's gotten.
But the letter's still the same.
The letter's still the same.
The big one. Oh, yeah, it is. Where's the end of the word on the Kells side? What is that?
Don't
about?
know.
So cool.
I cannot translate the Kells. I can't even really read it. It might be in here. But again, it's so complex. But the idea here is, if you're reading the Gospels, you're going to know kind of what the first word or two are, right? You're going to kind of know. So
Yeah.
it's not too, it's more, again, more of decoration. Side note, this was the work of the monasteries. Again, there's no printing presses. There's no way for people to get books other than a handwritten one.
We're all of them so
So
talented.
they'd have to do that every time.
So these are probably very complex, and these are well preserved because of how well they were done. The majority of manuscripts are not as beautiful as these. They're still very well done. They're still very nicely done, but they're not as complex as these. These were probably very important ones that were given to the Lord or kept in the monastery or something like that.
Were there only certain monks who could do this?
You would learn how to do it, and you'd spend 30, 40 years of your life maybe doing 3 Gospels your entire life.
Wait.
Or maybe one book of the Mass, or a whole Bible, right?
Wait, 3 Gospels, like...
3 whole Gospel books, 3 whole Bibles, right, throughout your life, yeah.
Oh, people Bibles.
But you would have 30 or 40 monks, and so you're going to be able to get 1 or 2 out a year if it's a medium-sized monastery. If it's a larger one, you can get 10 or 20 Gospels out a year. It just depends on the size of the monastery. Also, animals are expensive. It would take sometimes 20 or 30 cattle to do 1 book of the Gospels because of all the skins necessary, right? So books were expensive. That's why they weren't popular. That's why people didn't read very much. You just didn't have books. We didn't have libraries like that, yeah.
If you took the skin off of cattle, they wouldn't die. Their skin would die.
No, they would die. I mean, same thing with it. Same thing with a human. Like, you take a little bit of skin off, it's going to regenerate, but you take all the skin off, it's not going to come back. Okay?
At some point, your cells are just gone.
Yeah, yeah.
My nose regenerates.
All right, so let's move away from the Hiberno-Saxon. Let's move away from the Celts. Let's look at mainland Europe. They were producing manuscripts as well, but they're going to be very, very different. This is what's called the Coronation Gospels. There's some debate about when these were actually done. again, Charlemagne was crowned emperor in 800 AD. So we think these were done in the late 700s because there are records that state that he was given these, or he took his solemn oath on the book of these Gospels when he was crowned king. It might be slightly wrong. Maybe it was given to him afterwards, like in 810, 815. It doesn't matter. Broadly, Charlemagne asked for these to be done. They were done when he became emperor, and that's why they're called the Coronation Gospels.
Is that a sun or the halo?
That's the halo. So again, this is Matthew. This is the opening page of Matthew's Gospels. And you can see immediately how the style is radically different, right? From this Norse / Hiberno-Saxon style, it's going to be, this is the symbol page. This is very Roman, right? This is very Roman style. It looks like it's painted in Roman times. Holy Roman Emperor. This was done, in basically modern day Germany, where the Holy Roman Emperor was, where Charlemagne was at the time. One thing that is really unique about these Gospels is that they were dyed. They were dyed with a purple ink, and then they were illuminated with yellow, white, and gold ink. Well, not gold ink, but gold overlays. So they would take the skins and they would soak them in this purple. And again, remember, purple, very expensive, right? Very expensive to produce at the time. Not an easy thing to produce. That's why purple was very much a royal color, right? Only the kings, only the royalty could use purple. And so to dye a whole book, a whole manuscript in this was for Charlemagne. This was his Gospels, or these were his Gospels. Okay?
Where is this book at now?
It's in some museum somewhere. Not sure. Not sure.
So that
This
one's
stuff in the
Matthew.
US.
What's that?
That person's Matthew.
That one is not. That's just another.
I
Where are James
I would picture Matthew with a very blonde hair.
Next, the last book of Gospels we're gonna look at. Yep.
Should they draw themselves with halos?
Those are
No, these are representations of saints.
Oh, so they're not drawing themselves?
No.
Oh, I was like, that's
The-
kind of unholy for a holy
Right.
man to do.
So sometimes we know who the illuminators were. Sometimes they would sign their names on it. Oftentimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they do.
You go through all that work and then they're all like, oh,
5 years of your life, 10 years of your life, whatever.
describe. They
And
do
then
Yeah.
you have one page left, and then you die, and then someone else gets the credit for it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, it's
Oh,
stupid.
that's so sad.
So
How long would it take to do a page though?
at least a day. I mean, if you're just talking about writing it, you could probably do this in a day or two,
Okay, totally.
or maybe half a day. I don't know. It depends on how good you are, right?
Imagine how they could erase it.
So you just scrape it.
Okay.
So you just take a knife and you scrape it. The vellum is thick enough. The parchment is thick enough that you could do that.
So you could finish the book and then go back and scrape something if you messed up?
Yep. If you messed up a word or a letter, you could scrape it.
Stuff off right now.
That'd be so
You could.
sad if you messed up.
Or do they wax it when they're all the way done?
No, they're not putting anything on it.
It's a lot of scraping.
A lot of scraping.
Shoot, that's
The last book of Gospels we're going to look at is called the Ebbo Gospels. Very different.
That letter.
Very different. We're going to compare and contrast quite a bit of them.
How do they write in a straight line?
Well,
They would
made a line.
they would rule. So they would have rulers, and then they would just
Fish
They
shoulders.
ran like Silva.
still.
Heh.
So this artistic style is going to be very different, right? And we're going to compare and contrast. Don't worry if you don't remember what the Coronation Gospels look like. This is the same opening page, right?
Oh, really?
And it's very, very different. It's this scattered, some art historians call it a shaky pattern, right? Or a shaky style. Why? Well, the Ebbo Gospels were, and this is because it was commissioned by the Archbishop of the town of Ebbo, and so it was for his cathedral, and that's still where it is today. And there was this influx right around the time, 800s. What was happening around the 800s in Byzantium, in the Byzantine period? The iconoclast controversy. So if you're an artist, and there's the iconoclast controversy happening in Byzantium, and you can't draw stuff anymore, you flee, right? Some of them were even put in jail for blasphemy, right? So you flee, and you go into the protection of the West, Western bishops, Western kings, Western lords, and there you can find work being a manuscript creator, an illuminator. And so the Ebbo Gospels were done by Byzantine artists, and that's why the style is so radically different, is because they were fleeing from the ability to make them on their own. So let's look a little bit more. It almost looks impressionistic. Seniors, you've seen the Impressionist work before. It almost looks impressionistic, right? These very quick, right? It's not really detailed. It's not very, very refined. It's these quick brushstrokes, these quick lines, totally contrasting with this, which is very well done and very, very clear. These are almost impressionistic.
Do we know why they did it like that?
This was just what they brought over. This is probably what was happening. This is probably the artistic style that was happening in Byzantium at the time, and we've lost all of it because of the iconoclast controversy. Cultural, we're not sure. So again, we have more.
How come all their
Wait, it
clothes
looks like this.
how come all their clothes are the same?
Wait, it looks like it's all very.
Yeah, it's very much. It looks very modern. It's a total outlier. The Ebbo Gospels are totally strange in a good way.
The sun, like the.
Van Gogh, yeah.
How come
It's-
all their clothes are the same?
What was it, Goya that did this?
No, Munch.
Their robes are.
Why are the robes like that? Again, to show movement, to show interest.
They're all very wiggly.
Yeah, very wiggly. So again, here's a compare contrast. Coronation Gospels to Ebbo Gospels. Same opening page of the Gospel of Matthew. And you can tell how sort of the same, but very different.
Well, this with the Ebbo Gospel guy, I've seen the other one because it looks the same. Like the stamp
Yep.
is.
This was done about 20 years later. So odds are, maybe, probably, we don't know. So these manuscripts were passed around, or people would almost make pilgrimages to monasteries to read these, to see these. Right? These were artifacts. These were, hey, I'm going to go to this monastery to read this gospel. Okay? So we say Carolingian. Just keep in mind Carolingian on both these where we say Coronation Gospels and Ebbo Gospels. Carolingian means having to do with Charlemagne. So when you see the word Carolingian, that's Charlemagne. And these were both produced under Charlemagne's patronage. Broadly speaking, the Coronation Gospels were done specifically for him. The Ebbo Gospels were done for the Archbishop of Ebbo, but again, it was under the patronage of Charlemagne. And Charlemagne is going to do a lot to increase devotion throughout the Holy Roman Empire. That's why he and the Pope had such a great relationship. That's why the Pope crowned him, right? In fact, and said, you are the Holy Roman, you are the successor of Constantine. Because Charlemagne is going to do everything he can to, half for political reasons, let's not give him too much credit, right? Half for political reasons, but also half for pious reasons, he's going to try to increase faith and devotion in his kingdom.
So he was okay.
And so he's going to be, he was okay. He did some bad stuff too, but he's not a canonized saint by any means. But he's definitely going to be trying to increase devotion, and he's going to be giving money to monasteries. He's going to be supporting monasteries. He's going to be, people's lands that he's conquering, he's going to be giving that land to monasteries and forming new monasteries in his kingdom, right? And what are the monasteries doing? Producing these books. So we have a lot from this period, from this Carolingian period. Yeah.
The church during that time, were they against rulers just going and conquering land for themselves?
It was sometimes yes, sometimes no. It just depends. If it was a pagan culture, if it was a group of tribes, then it was like, we'll turn a blind eye to it this time. So, not as.
Isn't that not right nowadays?
Yeah, no, you shouldn't do that.
Just go over and-
Right. Again, the church has kind of developed its philosophy on that much more.
Another one up.
All right, so that's the main stuff. I wanted to show you just some more of what these manuscripts look like on some of the more interesting, boring quote-unquote pages. New chapters of the Gospels, they're not going to have these big 2-3 pages. It's going to have, one letter, right? And then you're going to have a little bit of illumination in each one. The other thing, too, is that sometimes the monks are having fun, right? Sometimes the monks are having fun. And also keep in mind, these are not just Gospels, right? Sometimes these are stories. Sometimes these are... the Gospels were the ones that were done the most often, especially by monasteries, but monasteries are also going to be writing, their own rule. They're going to be writing sometimes history books. Again, not that often. You're not going to ask one monk to spend 5 years to do something that's not as important as the Bible or as the Gospels. But there are going to be some of these that are going to be done, especially later on, as we get into the 1100s, 1200s. So we have, guys climbing on the side. This is what your standard page looks like from a later medieval 1200s, 1300s gospel looks like. And you can see these little ribbons here, right? This is probably, as I look at it, is probably a missal, right? Because you have these little tabs here where the priest, still holding his fingers together because he's consecrated the host, can move the gospel or move the missal with his other fingers, right? That's why we have those tabs on the missal still today. So that's probably what that is. Or maybe they're just bookmarks. I'm not sure. A fox being hung by other animals, right? Again, there's tons of these little illuminations all throughout, and sometimes they make no sense. Sometimes they're just little fun hidden images, right? The monks are going to want to have fun as well, right? You're going to spend 30 years of your life doing something. I'm going to have a fox being hung by pelicans or geese or whatever, right?
I've always wanted to draw this.
And then sometimes the imagery gets even more fun or funny.
The heck is that?
Devil.
Where would they put that? Like the whole page?
At the bottom of the page. This is really zoomed in. So like at the bottom of the page or something.
What is that?
So sometimes the imagery is weird. I don't know. Some sort of a beetle, bug, not sure.
Beetlebug.
His eyes like staring at your soul.
Sometimes also the imagery gives us a sense of what life was like during that time period. A lot of what we know about how life was lived during that period by the normal, ordinary people is in simple little illustrations like this, right? Historians love this stuff. Historians are going to look at this and go, oh, that's how a furnace was done. That's how he's doing that, right? You would look at that and go, okay, that makes sense. Hey, we just found out they were going to put the bellows on this side, right? For a historian who's studying medieval architecture and culture, this is going to be a game changer for him, right? We don't have photographic evidence, right? So these little things actually help, right? These are all little clues where we can find out. Where would you put this? I don't know, maybe in one of the Psalms where it's talking about the value of hard work, right? So you put a little guy working. Sure, why not? Right? You just make it more interesting. And sometimes there's political stuff in there as well. One thing that you're going to see all the time, especially in these Carolingian Gospels and these Carolingian manuscripts, and again, there's many more beyond just the two that we looked at. There's many, many more of these manuscripts. You see knights fighting snails.
What?
All the time.
Those are hard to fight. The fairies are fighting back.
Well, historians were puzzled about this for a long time, and then we found one little letter that was written where it was a knight who was talking about going and attacking the Lombards, who was another tribe or another kingdom at the time. And he referred to the Lombards, or as we call them, the snails. So the snails was a derivative term for the Lombard people. So that's why we're seeing knights fighting snails in a lot of these manuscripts, right? This was kind of, a not so kind term for the Lombard people. And sometimes we find things that are just bizarre. Dunno.
They said we're really having fun. What?
Right?
Happening over there in the monastery.
This is honestly like the best type of monk I've ever seen.
Sometimes the monks are gonna, there's all kinds of weirdness. Maybe a nun going, no, because a guy's bleeding from his butt. Saying no, like literally that's what's happening. Why? Why is he bleeding from his butt? Maybe she's praying for him. We don't know.
Probably ate the red flower.
Don't do drugs, kids.
What is happening to these
That's a bad rash.
Right?
This monastery is not appropriate.
They were.
Don't do drugs, kids.
There's other images of an abbot who was maybe kicked out of the monastery for doing something wrong, right? And so he would be depicted as the devil. In other instances, this abbot or this bad bishop who was kicked out or found to be doing awful things, they would show him. I'll just say it. They're basically making fart jokes at his expense, right? So they're going to show the bishop and he's bending over and whatever. Okay, we're not going to get into that. Okay.
That's just concerning.
This is great. This is an image of Our Lady punching the devil. Because
That's the worst punch I've ever seen.
Why not?
Because why not, right? She's got a flat-footed right hook going, and she's
These are in their books?
uh-huh.
Look at her face.
She's got a tutu on. It's not even a hook. It's just a...
No, the devil's come, like, is...
Right. She will crush the head, or she will get him with a right hook. Whatever.
What's he holding?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. Watch it.
If you look online and if you look up funny medieval illustrations or funny medieval manuscripts, you're going to see a ton of them. You're also going to see a lot of fun memes where people put text above it. Right?
Lucas, I found this link looks disconnected. Oh my gosh, it's Star Wars.
They predicted no, they added the text.
Oh, that wasn't back then?
No, it wasn't back then.
Wait, what's that
Darn
say?
it.
What does that say?
Really simple.
Lucas, I am thy father. Nay. No. Right. Okay, so there's a lot in there, right? There's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of these. So they're beautiful, they're ornate, they're really well done. Sometimes they're fun. But bottom line is they were useful, right? These were the books, these were the missals, this was the information of the time.
We're staring the Gospels, reading that, and you see that.
Nicely done.